I remember waking up in a hotel room in Chicago. I was 52 years old. The heating unit under the window was humming loudly. The air in the room was incredibly dry, and I had a dull, persistent ache at the base of my skull. I swung my legs out of bed, walked over to the bathroom sink, and drank 2 full glasses of tap water. I looked at myself in the mirror and felt completely empty. But far worse than the headache or the fatigue, I felt dead from the waist down. When you are in your 20s and 30s, your body gives you a clear signal every single morning. It is an involuntary physical response that tells you your systems are online. Your blood is moving. Your engine is primed. You do not even think about it. You just assume it is a permanent part of who you are. And then, somewhere in your late 40s or early 50s, that morning response becomes less frequent. Then it becomes a rare event. Then one day you realize it has stopped showing up entirely. We try to ignore it. We tell ourselves we're just tired. We blame the stress at work or the mortgage or the argument we had the night before. We drink a glass of water, put on a suit, and get on with the day. I used to think my problem was just sheer exhaustion. I was an executive hauling heavy luggage through airports, living on bad coffee, airport food, and adrenaline. I thought I was just paying the toll for a demanding career. When I finally decided I needed to start taking better care of myself, the very first thing I did was what every magazine and every doctor tells you to do. I started drinking water, gallons of it. I carried a plastic bottle with me everywhere I went. I had one in the rental car, one on my desk, one on the nightstand. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was flushing out the system. I assumed that if I just forced enough liquid into the machine, the pipes would eventually clear out and the internal pressure would return. It did not work. I was drinking water all day long, running to the bathroom between meetings, but my skin was still dry, my joints still ached, and my blood flow was exactly as weak as it had been before. I was fully hydrated on paper, but I was completely dried out at the cellular level. The cost of this was not just physical. It was deeply relational. I was married at the time to my first wife, and the distance between us was growing wider every single month. When your body stops responding the way a man expects it to respond, you do not talk about it. The shame is too quiet and too heavy. You do not sit down at the kitchen table and say that you are worried about your circulation. Instead, you invent excuses. You pull away. I know what I did. I stayed up late watching television programs I did not even care about, just so I would not have to go to bed at the same time she did. I spent extra hours in the garage organizing tools that were already organized. I started arguments about minor financial decisions just to create a reason to be angry and distant, because being angry was easier than being vulnerable. I let the physical failure of my body destroy the emotional bridge in my marriage. I'm not saying the water caused the divorce, but the refusal to face what was happening in my own body was a massive part of what unraveled. I was doing the bare minimum, drinking plain water, and hoping a miracle would happen in my bloodstream. I live in Scottsdale now. The environment here teaches you a lot about how nature actually works. If you go out into the desert after a long dry spell and pour a bucket of plain water onto the baked dirt, the water does not soak in. The ground is simply too hard, too tight. The water just pools on the surface and runs off into the street. The soil cannot absorb it because it lacks the internal structure to pull the moisture down into the roots. That is exactly what happens inside a man's body after 50 when he drinks plain, empty water. The water goes in, it passes rapidly through the plumbing, and it leaves. It never actually enters the cells. What I did not understand back then, and what I had to learn through a lot of trial and error, is that water is just the fuel. It is not the spark. Your body is a highly complex electrical system. Your blood vessels do not just passively sit there like dumb plastic pipes waiting for fluid to pass through. They are lined with active muscles. They need clear electrical signals to tell them when to open, when to close, and when to let the blood rush in. When those electrical signals are weak or missing, the vessels stay rigid. They clamp down. And when your blood vessels are clamped down, absolutely nothing flows smoothly. Not your daily energy. Not your focus, and certainly not your morning response. The problem was not in my head. The problem was in my infrastructure. My blood vessels were starved of the basic minerals that conduct electricity in the human body. The first thing I had to confront was the sheer amount of tension I was carrying. I was tense all the time. My shoulders were tight, my jaw was clenched during meetings, and without knowing it, my internal arteries were just as tight. I thought that was just the cost of doing business. I thought that was what being a responsible provider felt like. but that silent tension was physically strangling my circulation. I eventually learned that there is a specific mineral responsible for telling the muscles in your arteries to relax: magnesium. When you do not have enough magnesium in your system, the biological signal to contract completely takes over. Your arteries tighten up like a heavy rubber hose that someone is standing on. The heart has to pump harder just to move the blood, and the blood simply cannot push through the resistance to reach your extremities. I started adding a specific kind of magnesium to my routine. Not the cheap pills from the grocery store that just sit in your stomach. I bought magnesium glycinate in a powder form and started mixing it into my very first glass of water every morning. It was not a sudden magic trick, but after about 3 weeks, I noticed something subtle changing. The constant low-level physical anxiety I carried in my chest started to loosen. My breathing got noticeably deeper. And because the vessels were finally getting the electrical signal to relax, the blood had somewhere to go. The hose was no longer being pinched, but relaxing the pipes was only half the job. The water still had to actually get inside the cells to create the internal pressure needed for a real physical response. That is where I had to completely unlearn everything I thought I knew about salt. For decades, I avoided salt. I ate bland food. I ordered everything plain. I thought I was protecting my heart and doing the responsible thing. But the refined salt you get in packaged food is completely different from what the body actually needs. Real, unrefined salt is the gatekeeper of your cellular hydration. I started putting a tiny pinch of pink mineral salt into my morning water, just enough to barely taste it on the back of my tongue. That tiny bit of real salt changed the physical structure of the water I was drinking. It gave the water the electrical charge it needed to actually penetrate the cell walls. Instead of drinking a bottle of water and running to the bathroom 20 minutes later, my body started holding on to the hydration. The heavy fatigue that used to hit me every single afternoon around 3 o'clock began to fade away. I felt physically steady. I felt like the soil in the desert that was finally capable of absorbing the rain. There was a third element I was missing: balance. If magnesium relaxed the pipes and salt opened the gates, I needed something to keep the whole system from misfiring under pressure. I used to notice that my heart would sometimes beat heavily in my chest when I was just sitting quietly at my desk reading contracts. It was working far too hard to push blood through a system that was fundamentally out of balance. That is exactly what potassium regulates. It is the internal counterweight. It keeps the pressure even and the rhythm steady. I found a clean powder that had a heavy dose of potassium and started mixing it into a glass of water late in the afternoon. I usually do this after I go for a long walk or do some light resistance work in the garage. Adding potassium was like taking my foot off the brake while driving down the highway. The engine did not have to fight itself anymore. The internal pressure stabilized and the blood flow felt natural instead of forced. The last piece of the puzzle was the hardest for me to understand because it dealt with the thing we as men are most afraid of losing: drive. Not just the mechanical ability to perform, but the quiet, aggressive desire to perform. The hormone that makes you feel like a man who still has ground to conquer. My testosterone was clearly slipping. I could feel it in my daily mood. I was more passive in negotiations. I let things slide that I used to handle immediately. I thought it was just what happens when you cross 50 and get tired of the grind. But your body needs raw materials to manufacture that hormone, and the most critical raw material is zinc. I looked closely at my diet and realized I had almost no real zinc coming in, and the cheap multivitamin I swallowed once a week was not absorbing at all. I bought liquid zinc. I started dropping a little bit into my water in the middle of the day. I used a liquid because my older digestive system was not going to efficiently break down a hard, chalky tablet. The change was not overnight, but slowly, over a period of months, the mental fog began to lift. That low-level apathy was replaced by a familiar sharpness. The drive to engage with life and with my partner came back online. I've been married to Alyssa for several years now. She is 9 years younger than I am, and she is the kind of woman who does not let you hide behind your pride. She is a former interior design consultant, and she sees exactly what is in front of her. Early in our relationship, before we were married, we had a very direct conversation in my kitchen. I was making a cup of coffee, and I was making vague excuses about why I was too tired to go away for the weekend with her. She leaned against the kitchen counter and looked at me. She did not yell. She did not create drama. She just asked me why I was settling for a body that felt half asleep all the time. She asked me why a man who demanded so much excellence from his career demanded so incredibly little from his own physical infrastructure. It was a hard conversation to have. It stung my ego. My first instinct was to get defensive and list all the hours I was working. But it was the exact conversation that forced me to look honestly at how I was fueling the machine. I realized I was trying to run a high-performance engine on dirty water and hoping for the best. I look at my son Ethan now. He is 31, working in commercial real estate, grinding through his days the exact same way I used to. I see him drinking those massive jugs of plain water, thinking he is beating the system. I told him what I'm telling you. I told him not to wait until the plumbing stops working to figure out how the electricity operates. What I do now is not complicated. It does not require a medical degree or a massive investment of time. It simply requires consistency. When I wake up in Scottsdale, before I look at my phone, before I check an email, before I talk to anyone, I walk into the kitchen. I fill a large glass with water. I put a small scoop of magnesium powder in it. I add a tiny pinch of real salt. I stir it and I drink it slowly. I do not chug it. I let my body register that the minerals are arriving. I am sending a direct physical signal to my arteries to open up, relax the tension, and prepare for the demands of the day. In the middle of the afternoon, I add a few drops of liquid zinc to another glass of water. I am making sure my hormonal system has the supplies it needs to keep my baseline drive intact. In the evening, I mix the potassium into my water. I am calming the electrical system down so I can actually achieve deep sleep, instead of lying awake in bed with a wired mind and a completely exhausted body. The result of this routine is not that I feel 25 again. The result is actually better than that. I feel like a 63-year-old man who is fully in control of his physical faculties. When the blood vessels are open, when the tension is gone, and when the cells are actually hydrated, things change. That morning response that I thought was gone for good started coming back. Not every single day like a teenager, but consistently enough to remind me that the plumbing still works perfectly well when it is not starved of basic electricity. That changes how you carry yourself. It changes how you look at your partner across the room. When you know your body will respond when you ask it to, you do not have to avoid intimacy. You do not have to pick fights about the electric bill to create artificial distance. You can just be present. You can be the man she actually wants in the room without the quiet anxiety humming in the background. A lot of men watching this right now are quietly suffering through this exact situation. You are drinking your 8 glasses of plain water a day because you were told it was healthy. You are going to the bathroom constantly. You are perpetually tired. Your blood pressure is slowly creeping up year after year, and you are noticing that your physical response in the bedroom and in the morning is getting weaker and weaker. You probably think you're just getting old. You probably think this is the inevitable decline that every man has to accept. It is not. You are not broken. You are just depleted. You are trying to run a complex hydraulic and electrical system without the physical charge needed to open the internal valves. Do not accept weak blood flow as a permanent condition of your age. If you have crossed 50, circulation is the single most important metric you have. It dictates your brain function, your heart health, your joint mobility, and your performance behind closed doors. Stop drinking dead water. Put the spark plugs back into the engine. Start with the salt and the magnesium tomorrow morning. Do it consistently for a few weeks. Pay close attention to how your body feels when you wake up. Pay attention to the tension in your chest and the clarity in your head. We spend our whole lives building businesses, raising families, securing contracts, and managing financial assets. We meticulously maintain our cars and we fix the roofs on our houses at the first sign of a leak. It is time to stop ignoring the most important piece of infrastructure you own. I'm not saying this will fix every single problem in your life. I am saying it will change the physical reality of how you move through your life. And that is where everything else begins. Take the first step tomorrow morning. I will see you next time.